Welcome to the OSCTR tutorial on NIH Biosketches. My name is Rebecca Bourne. As the lead science writer for the OSCTR and as a freelance writer, I've often been asked for advice on how to write a biosketch. In this presentation, I'll summarize a few simple but effective strategies for preparing a biosketch that will strengthen your grant application and improve your chances of getting funded. By the end of the presentation, I hope you'll understand the key functions of the biosketch, know how to assemble and present the information for your biosketch, and feel confident in identifying and explaining what you bring to the project. Throughout the presentation, you'll find links to NIH web pages and other helpful resources. You can also request one-on-one assistance by clicking on the box labeled OSCTR Research Navigator Service at the top right of the slide. Now let's start with a general overview. The biosketch is a 5-page document that shows reviewers whether you have the right training, experience, and expertise to successfully lead the planned project. If you're applying for a grant with specific eligibility requirements, such as a loan repayment program, your biosketch should also show that you meet those eligibility requirements. In addition to the PI, all senior and key personnel and other significant contributors must submit a biosketch. This is how the reviewers will evaluate whether your team is qualified and committed to the project. The investigator criterion score is primarily determined by the biosketches, so I've found that biosketches can be pivotal for a grant application that's right on the funding line. But you don't have to take my word for it. Now that we've seen how important the biosketch is, let's go over a few general guidelines that you can use to strengthen the biosketches in your grant application. First, review every biosketch in the application. A poorly prepared biosketch will give the reviewers a bad impression of your research team. So always check. Do the biosketches accurately portray your qualifications and your collaborators' qualifications? Is the biosketch easy to read? Are the spelling and punctuation correct? Do the important points come through clearly? If a collaborator's biosketch doesn't meet these standards, you can make minor changes to address these issues and then ask your collaborator if the revised biosketch is acceptable. You can also point out your concerns and ask the collaborators to make these changes. But if you're in a time crunch, it's usually faster to make the changes yourself and then get the collaborator's approval. You may find that you need several versions of your biosketch tailored to different lines of research or different funding agencies. Many investigators use Science CV to manage different versions of their biosketch and to ensure that the information remains up to date. Once you've created a biosketch in Science CV, you can export it as a Word file. In Word, you can adjust the formatting so that the key points stand out. In this example, we used tabs to offset references from the main text and to align the funding dates along the right margin. We also used bold font and double spacing between sections to make it easier to navigate the biosketch. These general guidelines apply to all the components of your biosketch. We'll also go over each section of the biosketch in this presentation. We'll begin by talking about how to compile and present the information in the header, positions and honors, and research support sections. Then we'll go over strategies for discerning and communicating your strengths in the personal statement and the contributions to science. The top of the biosketch lists your name, title, and training. So this is a good place to list any residencies or postdoctoral training. Always make sure the biosketch lists your current title. Once you've written the whole biosketch, if your biosketch goes over the 5-page limit, you can save a few lines by condensing this form. If you're working in Word, select the text in the form, open the paragraph menu, set the spacing before and after each paragraph to 0, and click OK. Section B of the biosketch lists your positions and honors. I usually organize this information under the subheadings of position and employment, professional memberships, and honors and service. Information should be presented in chronological or reverse chronological order under each subheading. Each item should be directly related to your career path. So for example, you could include employment as an undergraduate researcher, but other undergraduate employment might not be relevant. Similarly, honors and service should be limited to your achievements in research and medicine. This might include awards from your institution, selection for a competitive summer research program, or service as a reviewer. Section D of the Biosketch describes all of your ongoing research support and relevant completed support, typically from the last 3 years. The goal here is to show the focus of your research and your success in acquiring funding. This is different from the other support document, so you do need to provide both documents. The research support section of your Biosketch needs to be updated for every grant application. Science CV will automatically update your NIH funding, but any non-NIH funding needs to be updated manually. For each grant, provide the funding agency, the current grant number, and the entire project period. Note that for NIH grants, the grant number includes the grant type and the current grant year, as you see in this example. Also name the PI for each grant, and if you were not the PI, or if you were a co-PI, make sure that you indicate your role in the project. Then list the title of the grant. Using bold font will help the reviewer quickly see your research focus. If you led a sub-project on the grant, be sure to include the title of your project. Finally, include a brief description of the project. 3 sentences is usually enough. For ongoing research support, the description is usually in present tense, as shown in the first 2 examples here. The third example shows completed research support. This is in past tense and highlights how the project contributed to the field. Together, the items in the research support section show the reviewers the trajectory of your research. The reviewers will use your entire application to infer your skills and qualifications, but the personal statement is your chance to clearly explain who you are as a researcher and to demonstrate your commitment to the project. As always, you can make a good impression by paying attention to detail and being straightforward. After reading your personal statement, the reviewers should feel like they just had a conversation with you. You want to give the reviewers a sense of what makes you tick, what drives you, and how you approach a problem. A colleague or mentor who knows you well can critique your personal statement to make sure these main points come through clearly. If you're an experienced investigator, your personal statement might explain priorities, mention accomplishments, and highlight areas of service that might not be evident in other parts of the Biosketch. If you're a junior investigator, you can use the personal statement to explain how scientific or clinical observations sparked your interest in this topic. This will also reinforce your ability to make an observation, define an important research question, and design a rigorous line of research. You might also briefly describe your career goals for the next 5 to 10 years. Along with this, you want to explain how your training and experience have prepared you for success in this project and in the long term. You can do this without overselling your achievements by mentioning the people you've trained with, key skills you've learned, and unique accomplishments, such as developing a new approach or hypothesis. Your personal statement will have a greater impact if you weave these facts into a story that connects the dots for the reviewers. How do your experience, knowledge, skills, insights, and resources interact to support the success of this project and your future career? Beneath the personal statement, you should provide citations to support the key points in the personal statement. Up to 4 citations are allowed here. In addition to supporting your personal statement, you can use these citations to draw attention to high-impact publications or achievements that don't fit elsewhere in the Biosketch. We'll go over the citations in more detail in just a few minutes. But first, let's look at an example of how the personal statement can be tailored to a specific proposal. These 2 personal statements were written by the same investigator. In the top example, the grant focused on a collaborative translational research program in Sjogren's syndrome. In the bottom example, the grant focused on mentoring investigators in inflammatory disease research. You can see that each of these personal statements started from the same basic template, but then they were tweaked to emphasize the scientific theme and broader goals of the planned project. Both statements include the name of the project and use language that directly reflects the program objectives stated in the RFA. They also indicate the person's role in the project. They both use the 4 citations to reinforce key points. In this case, a history of successful collaboration and examples of successful mentoring. Now let's talk about the citations. You have opportunities to include citations in the personal statement and in the contributions to science. Be sure to use consistent formatting for all citations. Also, be absolutely certain that your publications are compliant with the NIH Public Access Policy. This is crucial because if your Biosketch includes non-compliant publications, your grant application can be administratively rejected. We have a link here to the NIH Public Access Policy, but basically, you'll need to list the PMC ID for any publications supported by NIH funds that were awarded on or after April 7, 2008. If this policy does not apply to a manuscript, it's a good idea to indicate why. Note that the PMC ID is different from the PM ID. This is a pretty common mistake. Also, a manuscript might not have a PMC ID if it was accepted within the last week or two. In this case, you can use the citation, but provide the NIH ID or indicate that the manuscript is in press and PMC journal in process. And we have an example of that here. The OSCTR or your library can help with specific questions, but be sure to start early. Now let's talk about the contributions to science. The goal here is really pretty simple. You want to show that you can think through a problem and that you can place your work in a broader context to help move science forward. You do this by describing up to 5 of your most significant contributions to science. For career development awards, you might have only 2 or 3 contributions, and that's okay. By the time you're ready to compete for independent R01 level funding, your Biosketch should include 4 contributions or 3 really significant contributions. It's always a good idea to align these contributions with the goals and themes of your current proposal. Each contribution should be supported by at least 2 citations, preferably 3. There's a maximum of 4 citations per contribution. You can cite publications that you didn't write if they describe the importance of research you participated in. For example, you might cite an article that highlights one of your publications or a set of your publications. You could cite work by other authors that clearly builds on your work. A lot of junior investigators feel intimidated by this section, but I want to reassure you. Great scientists are not born great, they grow great. And you are here today because you have that potential, and because you've already made important contributions to science. So here are a few strategies for identifying those contributions. First, pull up your list of publications in PubMed. These don't have to be first author publications. You can describe what your team did, but be sure to indicate your role in the project. Then look over the titles of your publications and maybe glance at the abstracts to refresh your memory. What trends or themes emerge? Can you find groups of 3 to 4 publications that fit together in some way? If you're a junior investigator, you may have 15 or fewer publications. That is okay. Try to find a way to use all of them in your Biosketch. Publications that don't quite fit with the others can go under the personal statement. Next, you can dig a little deeper by skimming the introductions of your manuscripts or review articles published around the same time as your papers. This will help you remember where the field stood when you started your work and the unanswered questions that your work helped address. Another way to judge the impact of your work is to look at papers that have cited your manuscripts to see how your findings changed what people thought in the field. Your contributions might be conceptual. Did your work challenge, support, or extend a paradigm? Did you make a completely new observation? Or maybe your contributions are more applied. Did you help contribute new methodologies to the field? Did your research help lead to a change in clinical practice? After you've thought about these questions, have a conversation about what you've done in science. Your mentor, department chair, or a trusted colleague can bring a different perspective and help you identify your contributions. When you're ready to write your contributions, you can follow a simple formula to make sure they are clear and convincing. First, provide a brief title for each contribution. Then state the problem that your work addressed. This should take just 1 or 2 short sentences. You can describe what was known or assumed when you started your work, what remained unknown, or what practical obstacles hindered experimental progress or effective patient care. Next, describe what your team did and how that addressed the problem. Did your work provide results that challenged, supported, or extended a paradigm? Maybe your findings delineated a cause-effect relationship or established a new methodology. Finally, summarize what is different in research or clinical practice because of this work. Here's an example of a contribution section that follows this formula. Thank you for participating in this tutorial. I hope it gave you the tools you need to develop a strong biosketch for your next grant application. I'd also like to thank Mary Flynn and Stephanie Mode for sharing their insights, as well as everyone at the OSCTR who contributed. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions or if there's a topic you'd like us to cover in our next tutorial. Until then, happy writing.